This is our extension of classical conditioning video notes. So the whole goal of what we're going to try to get through today is just furthering our understanding of classical conditioning. That it's not necessarily this kind of blind development of an association between two objects or pieces of stimuli, that there are other aspects to understanding how we go about developing those classically conditioned associations, that oftentimes it can involve cognitive processes that have to be present, or biological influences that are also there. So that is our goal for today. So in order to kind of extend out our understanding of classical conditioning, you've got to take a look at J.B. Watson. Watson is a very, very important contributor to the field of behaviorism in general and our understanding of classically conditioned association and learning. Watson, in 1908, at the age of 30, became the president of the psychological department at Johns Hopkins University, or the chair of that department. In 1913, he is going to kind of usher in this era of behaviorism, and we've discussed that very, very heavily as one of the key psychological approaches to the study of behavior, by basically writing 3 sentences, what is going to be known as the Behaviorist Manifesto. This kind of overarching theme to what it is that behaviorists believe with regard to the field of psychology. And the first sentence to that is that psychology's content should only be emphasizing behavior, not consciousness or levels of consciousness the way that Freud emphasized. And further, it should not be anything that involves introspection. The only method that should be used within behaviorism and psychology is objective methods, okay? So means of scientifically being able to test certain pieces of research. The third thing to keep in mind is that he believed psychology's goal should be the prediction and control of behavior, okay? So very much an applied science kind of mentality, that we should take the research that we find and apply it to helping people to understand why they act the way that they do, and to go about kind of attempting to address that fact. In 1915, just to show you just how popular Watson and his ideology is going to become, he's going to be elected president of the APA, the American Psychological Association. So, very, very big stuff. What Watson is going to be really well known for is kind of twofold. One is the little Albert experiment that we'll get into in a second, and the other is his influence on advertising campaigns. And we kind of alluded to the fact that one such type of example of classical conditioning is how advertisers attempt to take a celebrity, pair them with their product, and create that association of you wanting to buy a product because that celebrity uses it. And much of that is founded on J.B. Watson's principles. So let's talk Little Albert, okay? Little Albert was an 11-year-old baby. He is the son of a woman who was a cleaning lady, basically, at Johns Hopkins. And Watson and his assistant, Rosalie Rayner, wanted to use little Albert in their experiment, and they wanted to basically condition him to be fearful of an object. Now, nowadays, this would never, ever fly. Ethically speaking, you would not be able to get away with what it is that they end up doing with little Albert, and you'll understand why as we go through this process. But at the time, they were truly convinced, in fact, that they could condition a child to develop responses and behaviors that they never once had before. So let's take a look at this piece by piece. The unconditioned stimulus in the Little Albert experiment, if you've been paying attention to your reading guide, is a very loud noise, crashing cymbals, a loud gong, something along those lines. It happens behind Little Albert, so he doesn't see it or know that it's coming. And so when that very loud crashing noise occurs, his unconditioned response is to jump, to become fearful, to start crying even. He's also presented with a white rat. That is our neutral stimulus in this scenario, because it had no level of automatic response from him with regard to certain behaviors. But over time, as that neutral stimulus was paired with our unconditioned stimulus, We had the establishment of fear as an unconditioned reaction and crying. And so Albert became conditioned to respond to a white rat with fearful behavior. Okay, so anytime he was presented with that rat, he freaked out basically. And the sad thing is, just to tell you just how easily it can happen that we develop certain classically conditioned responses, it only took 7 trials for Albert to become responsive to the rat. Only 7 times that they had to pair that rat with that noise. That's it. And to strengthen that response that little Albert had as a result of the rat being presented, what Watson and Rosalie Rayner would do was, every 5 days or so, they would reintroduce that unconditioned stimulus, this very loud noise right here, every 5 days or so, with that white rat to strengthen Albert's association of the rat and developing his fear. So, you can see now, I think, why it is that you just wouldn't be able to get away with something like this, ethically speaking, because this could have, some pretty severe consequences on this baby later on in his life. And interestingly enough, Albert's family is going to end up moving away before Watson ever has an opportunity to uncondition that fear from Albert, because we find in the aftermath of this that Albert started to generalize out his fear to anything that was white and fluffy, okay, anything that resembled that white rat. He became fearful of Santa's beard, had freakouts to a bunny, a white bunny. He would become fearful of fur coats, which were very popular at that point in time. Okay, and he never had this opportunity to have that fear counter-conditioned, if you will, out of him, because the family moved away before Watson had that opportunity. However, with that in mind, most psychologists actually agree that more than likely little Albert didn't end up continuing to remain scared of anything that was furry and white. And the reason why we believe that is the concept of extinction, okay? If Watson did not continue to strengthen the response, that conditioned response of crying and fear, because you can see up here in this picture, this is little Albert right there, and this is one of Watson's assistants, and she has on her face a furry white bunny mask, okay? And you can't really tell in the picture, but he's crying, like freaking out crying, okay? We think that it never would have continued after, over time, because the strengthening of his response to the unconditioned stimulus wouldn't be presented anymore. The UCS would not be presented with those furry things over and over to strengthen that level of response toward the piece of stimuli. And so as a result, they truly do believe that more than likely over time, Albert's fear of anything that was white and fluffy would go away over time. So it is important to note the rise and fall of J.B. Watson. Shortly after his experiment with little Albert, it comes to light that J.B. Watson was having an extramarital affair with his assistant Rosalie Rayner, and at that point in time, that is just it's a no-no. Anymore in our day and age, if extramarital affairs occur, there's almost kind of a level of blasé reaction to it. It's just kind of like, oh, well, there's another one. Somebody who was well known having some kind of extramarital affair, and so people kind of just brush it off to an extent. You just didn't do that back in the 1920s and 30s, and so Watson is actually going to end up being forced to retire from Johns Hopkins, from the APA. He's going to have to get out of research entirely because he cheated on his wife. After all of this goes down, though, he does end up being employed by a guy named J. Walter Thompson, who had a very famous ad agency, very successful ad agency at that point in time. And he is going to use J.B. Watson as a means of understanding the human psyche to sell products. Basically, what J.B. Watson does is he takes his behaviorist psychological background and he applies it to the concept of advertisement to get people to buy J. Walter Thompson's products over another. Because what Watson showed through his research was that our preferences between rival products, like Coke and Pepsi, they're not based on our sensory qualities. It's not because we perceive the detection of certain taste parts to Coke over Pepsi. Really what it is, it's our associations. And so that is what J.B. Watson is going to use with regard to advertising, and that is obviously still very present today. Just to show you just how successful Watson is going to be in terms of making J. Walter Thompson large amounts of money, he is going to help put the Maxwell House coffee on the map, so to speak, because what he did was he used the kind of popular concept of the coffee break, and he caused people to develop an association with that kind of nice respite from work for a few minutes with having Maxwell House coffee, and it was a very, very, very successful ad campaign. Another is Pond's cold cream. Basically, this is the predecessor to those L'Oreal or Oil of Olay wrinkle releaser kind of smooth out your face kind of things. And Pond's was very successful because what J.B. Watson helped them do was they used testimonials of beautiful, exotic, foreign queens from Romania and Spain talking about how, you know, their skin was just so beautiful because they used Pond's cold cream. And so women started to kind of develop that association of, oh, if I buy this, I'll look like them. Another one that he was very successful in pushing was Johnson's baby powder. Basically what this whole ad campaign did was it convinced moms that there needed to be an association between any time you changed your baby's diaper, you had to use Johnson's baby powder. A very, very impactful career is going to come out of J.B. Watson. Because one of the things that he taught us through his research is that we can use behaviorism as a means to help those with certain disordered behaviors. Remember, one of his key components to that behaviorist manifesto is learning to control certain behaviors based off of our predictions of them. Counter-conditioning is going to be incredibly beneficial for those that develop phobias, much like little Albert's, or other anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, things like that. Because what they do is they counter-condition a person to respond in a relaxed manner. So if they respond in a very relaxed manner to that fearful object, that phobia or that disordered behavior, eventually the CR is going to become extinct. And so much of Watson's research has helped us to provide that means of psychotherapy to those that are afflicted with those particular disorders. The other thing to keep in mind where Watson's research is concerned is taste aversion. We alluded to it a little bit earlier in our initial set of classical conditioning video notes, and you heard me talk about my development of a taste aversion. It's when we avoid a certain food because we've developed an association, a link between that conditioned stimulus, that piece of food that we don't like, and the unpleasant experience of getting sick afterwards. Here's the interesting thing about taste aversion, though. It falls outside of the traditional realm of normal classical conditioning scenarios because, as we learned earlier, in order for classically conditioned associations to develop, you've got to present the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus 0.5 seconds between one another. So it has to be very quick in terms of when you're presenting those two pieces of stimuli. In taste aversion, though, that doesn't happen. Because if you think about it, you don't eat a food and then 0.5 seconds later end up getting sick. It takes a little bit longer than that. It can be several hours. It can happen overnight, okay? So it's a very interesting scenario of taste aversion that it falls outside of the realm of our traditional understanding of most classical conditioning cases because it happens after a fairly significant delay. And the thing to keep in mind about taste aversion is that a gentleman named John Garcia is going to take it even further in our understanding of taste aversion and kind of elaborate on the fact that classical conditioning isn't as automatic of a process or, mindless as we perceive it to be, and that oftentimes classical conditioning can actually be biologically predisposed. And he very much took a look at taste aversion to study this.